We'll bring it back home here in South Africa. The lack of performance management may be the main reason for poor service delivery. That's the word from CEO of Rail Consulting, Sacha Sorrell. According to Sorrell, both the public and private sectors are guilty of a decline in service delivery. And it goes without saying that poor service delivery is an enormous issue here in South Africa. It's been highlighted by protests, and also earlier on in the year, President Jacob Zuma and his administration committed to performance management agreements to boost service delivery in government. However, according to Sorrell, it takes more than an agreement to actually implement the delivery of quality service. Mr. Sorrell now joins us in studio. A very good morning to you.
Good morning.
What needs to back that agreement for it to actually work?
The most important thing for me is to ensure that performance management is based on clear measurable deliverables. Every person needs to be clear on what they must deliver and the standards. So often in organizations there's job descriptions. So when they talk about customer service, they talk about, oh, you must treat customers better, but it's not clear. So performance management, for it to be effective, you've got to clarify what's unacceptable standards, what's acceptable standards, what's good and what's excellent, and then link good quality service to some kind of reward, whether it's a bonus, whether it's some kind of incentive, and poor performance must be linked to some kind of reprimand.
But Sacha, it sounds actually quite easy when you speak about it like that, and even if you look at the human resources, but performance management is the core of human resources, and yet a lot of organizations don't do it. Why do you think that is?
I think the main problem is accountability. So I think there's a big problem in South Africa, I think globally, but what I'm observing in South Africa is a lot of managers don't hold their people accountable, maybe because they're afraid of upsetting them or just not making the time to actually manage their staff effectively. And if staff know they're not going to be held accountable, then of course, as human beings, we get away with not delivering and not doing our jobs effectively. So as soon as we're measured and we know we're going to be held accountable, often standards just people will step up and perform more effectively.
I want to say that when I was studying business administration, one of my lecturers, and this is something he said quite often, is that if you do not reward success, you're in a sense rewarding failure. So
Absolutely.
I want you to talk a little bit to that specifically on how organizations should be going about that, rewarding success, and also you have to do this, otherwise this is what could happen if you don't meet your performance agreement.
Absolutely. I think it's based on the basic premise of psychology. Basic psychology tells us that all human beings move towards pleasure and away from pain. So as your lecturer said, if you give someone an incentive to say, if you do perform well, this is the pleasure. So we want to move towards that pleasure of getting that reward, that acknowledgement, that bonus, that possibility of getting a promotion in the company. And at the same time, people must know that if they're not going to deliver, there's going to be a reprimand, which is the pain. So I think performance management, to be effective, works on the basic psychological principles of understanding human behavior.
Now, something that even foreign businesses have said, even some people, some sectors here in South Africa have said, is that our labor laws are quite stringent, and so that makes it sometimes difficult to be able to do some of this. How do you work around that to still stick within the law, with what the law allows, and yet still be able to hold your employees accountable?
Absolutely. It must be aligned to labor law. It must be done ethically. It must be fair. So what we're saying is, if someone's being paid, what's acceptable standard is what which is what you expect someone to be paid. But if they go beyond the call of duty, there's an extra reward. And if it's beyond the standard, there's a reprimand. But it absolutely must be aligned with the labour law, where people get a warning. And if they're not performing, they have an opportunity to be coached, increase their performance, maybe improve the system. So it must be fair. It must be ethical.
When it comes to management skills, though, because you did mention this, of managers sometimes being almost afraid to say to their non-performing subordinates that this is what you're supposed to be doing, and if you don't do this, these are the consequences. Why do you think there is that trepidation when it comes to that?
Yeah, as we mentioned before, it's the accountability part. I think people as human beings, again, the psychology comes back to people are afraid sometimes to hold people accountable, because what if I'm not liked? Or what if I'm going to create conflict?
Don't people like that, though? Don't people want to be held accountable? And don't people, at first when you're putting these measures in place, it might not be pleasant, but at the end of the day, I think there is a reward to being productive. Don't people want
absolutely. You'd like to think so. I think some people do want that. I think it depends if they're a performer. Of course they want to be held accountable because they want to be acknowledged for the good work. But of course people who are not performing, people who want to just get paid and get away with not delivering, of course, don't want to be held accountable. So I think it depends on someone's performance standard.
So an organization comes up to you and says, well, we have a huge problem. We have not been conducting this performance agreement or this performance process in the way that we should. It's been years. We've got employees that have been working us for years, and now we want to turn it around. How would you advise them going about that?
The most important thing is clarifying for every person in the company to be clear on their measurable deliverables. So a lot of companies are not clear on exactly what they want. They'll have job descriptions which describes what the person does, but doesn't clarify exactly precisely what is the deliverable. Because without the deliverables, you can't then translate that to clear metrics on a performance management scorecard. So the first thing is clarity, and then once you've got that in place, to clarify based on the measurable deliverable, as I mentioned before, what's unacceptable standards, what's acceptable based on that standard, what's good and what's excellent. So making it very clear. For me, the key word is clarity, and then making it very clear to the person who's doing the job what's expected of them, and then ensuring the manager on a regular basis is going to work with them on those deliverables.
In your experience, how long does that transition take?
I mean, it depends on the size of the company, but anywhere I would say minimum 6 months. Plus, it could take a year, it could take a year and a half, depending on the size of the company, depending on the size of the rollout. And of course, the key aspect as well is translating the strategic objectives through the performance management. So if the company needs to go through a whole re-strategy at the highest level, then that will take a bit longer. So it really depends on what's been done in the organization.
And what does that culture change do for the employees?
I mean, if that level of accountability is brought through, there's no question that profitability increases. The research shows it globally. Every company that goes through an effective performance management process, linking the strategic objectives to the performance management, making it very clear what the standards are required, and then followed through with accountability from managers, the results are outstanding. That turns the company around.
So many people have said to me that if you compare the US, for instance, and especially in retail, and you look at the way the US does when it comes to customer service and keeping the customer happy and really performing, they really are right at the top there.
Right.
So what are we not doing to get us there, or what is it that we can do to make us, that competitive when it comes to our customer service, retaining our clients, increasing our bottom line?
So very clear. It's interesting. I've just come back from the US and just did some work with a retail client there. And one of the things that they do with everyone in every shop is exactly that. Have a performance management system. They clarify how do they want their staff to behave to customers. In other words, what kind of way of communicating, what kind of welcome, all those different criteria. They make it very clear. And actually the manager showed me what they use. And every single behavior that they want to see demonstrated by their employee is measured. So there's a key principle that what you don't measure, you can't manage. So everything that they want them to behave, they measure, and then of course, as long as it's implemented, it inspires the employee to step up and provide better customer service.
That's what I was trying to say. It does inspire you to actually want to do your job better when you do have something that you're working towards.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us, Sacha Sorrell. He's from Real Consulting, and he was just speaking to us about performance management and his view that the lack of it is largely to blame for poor service delivery here in South Africa. Well, let's just take a look at